Okay, thank you, Prajnamanas. Good evening to you all. Hello, future online viewers. Can't forget them. Good. So what I'll do is, in a couple of sentences, recap the story so far. Some of you are just tuning in now, or a couple of days ago. So the situation is King Trisong Detsen, I think I've got that name right. Anyway, the king of Tibet, wants to establish Buddhism in Tibet, asks a scholar monk called Shantarakshita to build him a big monastery to aid this purpose. Shantarakshita does his level best, builds the monastery during the day, and finds that demons are pulling it down in the night, and doesn't despair exactly, he just acknowledges his own limitation, goes back to the king and says, I'm afraid I'm not the man for the job, you need Padmasana. Okay? Enter Padmasana, who's sent delegates by the king with messages saying, please come, I need your help to establish the Dharma in Tibet. Padmasana starts on his journey, but has a very, very long detour before he reaches Samye, where this monastery site's been chosen. And what he does is he goes around the whole country taming its demons. Okay? Eventually the king sends him a message saying, I have now sent you so many delegates and so many messages, it only lacks for me to climb over the mountains and find you myself. Please, please come. Padmasana takes another year and a month, taming some very last demons, and goes to the monastery, which we might come back to. Okay, so he tames the demons in quite an entertaining way. I recommend you read it. Things happen like a goddess called Fury tries to crush him between two mountains. A yak the size of a mountain breathes snow and ice out of its nostrils, and so on. And he does, well, tame is a tame word for what he does. Sometimes I think he just gets into communication and subdues them, and they, I don't know, agree with him and agree to help him. But he also does things like melt them, like the sun searing butter. At one of them he points at and burns all its flesh off, and then somehow also blinds it in one eye. And the remaining skeleton and single functioning eye is very apologetic and says, I promise now to help you, and that promise is a great comfort to me. So he definitely wins in some quite creative ways, and then he's ready to address this issue of the monastery. But he finds it very, very important, in a way that the king doesn't understand, to go round all the places of Tibet with all these quite beautiful poetic names, dealing with that. He knows that this must be done before arriving at the monastery. Okay, so you might be thinking, what's this to do with us? And but you probably already have a sense that demons are real. I'm not so fussed personally whether they're a physical presence or just a psychological matter. I actually think it doesn't matter very much, and probably the answer is neither. I'll just say what I mean. I think a demon is a kind of manifestation of anything that is contrary to your purpose, if you see what I mean. That could be interior, could be exterior, but we don't really understand the relationship between interior and exterior anyway, and we're creating it much of the time because it's all within our consciousness. But let me give a more day-to-day example. So I wouldn't have to show you anything more than, to prove my point, a local cat who I know, who lives in the women's community just over the roof terrace from my community. And I've noticed about this cat that it's kind of cute and friendly, and it used to live in our community actually, so we still run into each other from time to time. And you can think it's all going well with this cat. Take a step too far, and she'll whip round, and I don't know if you've seen this kind of thing in animals, the face, with only some subtle changes, goes from cute furry thing to a demon. And I really do mean it. Somehow I assume they've evolved partly to do this. They are actually, well, they're cats, aren't they? And you get them in much bigger forms. But it will whip round, she will whip round with her jaws open, and the eyes narrow, the eyebrows back, the ears sticking out the side, kind of like some kind of mini machine of death. And for a split second, you are actually frightened. It's funny to admit, but it is actually frightening. So you do whip your hand away and think, crikey, I better not. And then you think, it's just a cat. And then she's reassumed her cute furry manifestation. You think, what's wrong with me? But it is as though she actually transforms into something else, and your instinct tells you that's not just a cute cat. If you see what I mean, you are actually frightened, and you can raise the demon by going about things in the wrong way. It's very funny. Someone came to stay for a couple of weeks in our community who was hoping to live with us. And he came to dinner one night, had scratches all over the back of his hand. And we said, you've been initiated now. I said, how did that happen? And he said, well, I was stroking her. And we said, prolonged unaware stroking? He said, yeah. I said, were you doing something else at the time? He said, yeah, I was on the phone, looking out the window. I said, yeah, that'll get you. That'll raise the demon. So I think that they're a real matter for us. On a more serious note, of course, people also change. I'm not saying people themselves are demons necessarily, but if you've seen someone in a loving state and not long after in a hateful state, it is as though they have a different face and as though they are a different person. I don't just want to say they, I'm sure I've also done this. Presumably you could explain this by chemicals in the brain and movements of musculature in the face, but I don't really mean explain. I think that's additional information, but I think it only explains it as well as saying there is a demon. Okay, so that's the sort of thing I mean in interpreting this story of Padmasana of taming the demons. It's a wacky story, like I say, but if we feel that demons are just the stuff of myth, I think that would probably have more to do with our lack of imagination and a view of a slightly dead world than a truth particularly. There's quite a well-known story of Tibetans being very reluctant to have their mountains mined for metals so that it doesn't disturb the dragons that live inside them, which I find quite moving and poignant and actually more persuasive than a lot of other arguments. And it stimulates, I think, a sort of love that can be what's missing on both sides, actually, of debates about the environment, for example. They say, dragons live in these mountains and we don't want to disturb them. We feel we live in a world made of people and, some pavements and some trees and, Coke cans and so on, and that we've got kind of a living organism in here and then a boundary and then basically scenery, if you see what I mean, like I was saying this afternoon, and also some other people featuring in that. But it's as though you've got kind of units of life with dead space in between. Very kind of odd view when you start to unpack it. Actually, the Buddhist universe is one that's completely alive, and our founder has said that enlightenment is impossible in a universe that you do not understand as alive, which is worth thinking about. Sometimes in the culture that I grew up in England, spirits become ghosts, and then you basically debate whether or not they exist, which is a shadowy reflection, I would say, of the debate as to whether God exists or not. You've basically got one enormous magical presence, and then the earth, or you've not, if you see what I mean. You've either got spirits that walk around in their kind of form of people who haunt you, or that's baloney, if you see what I mean. It's terribly dualistic. And you could even say that dualism, saying that things are basically, again, like I was saying this afternoon, they are basically either 0 or 1, itself raises a demon. Because if you say that, I know that the universe is just made of matter, consciousness is just in my brain, it's snuffed out when I die, and that's that, actually, I think death becomes way more frightening, not less. Death gets relegated out of the way, It's interesting, I've myself seen 1 or 2 corpses at funerals, and that's it. It's interesting hearing Don Utah's story last night at the cremation. I found that very, very moving, but very well pointed to something of value, actually. I've still, 36 years old, I've hardly ever seen a dead person. I'm slightly ashamed of that. Not because I really want to, but because I live in a culture and a time. I know there's exceptions, and I know that, all of us in this room are from different backgrounds and cultures, but I personally have grown up in a culture where death is very out the way. And there's a conscious story there that you don't need to think about it, because life's going to be, you're going to have a good life, if you see what I mean, and then in brackets it just sort of ends, if you see what I mean. In that bracket and that little out the wayness of that story is a demon that will confront us when it might be too late for us to really have given it thought. One little story while I'm on this, Subhuti, a very experienced order member and speaker and writer, was filling out a hospital form that said on it, not because there was any threat to him, but he'd been to an appointment, and he's told the story himself. The form said, "Have you had thoughts of death recently?" He wrote, "I think about death every day," presumably to provoke them, presumably to get the demon into view and say, "Yes, absolutely I have, and I make a conscious practice of this." And he said it triggered an unending series of phone calls from worried NHS counsellors, not necessarily handing over to each other before going off shift or whatever, kept bringing him up, to offer support. Funny. Anyway, cats and faces aside, I've been having a bit of a think about what demons are for us now, today, in our life. I think one is rivalry. By rivalry, I mean something that people sometimes call competitiveness, but because competitiveness has got, I think, a healthy form, I'm calling the unhealthy form rivalry. So trying to succeed at the expense of somebody else. Careerism, that will often be for us. Needing to push somebody out of the way to get the advantage I want. So rivalry. Lack of commitment. We heard a bit about that in the first half of the retreat from Padmasana. Not putting your stake in the ground and saying, this is what I want to live my life for, this is what I want to do with my time, so that we keep ourselves, at least mentally, if not physically, moving around between different places, keeping options open, kind of, backpacking comes to mind. Do you see what I mean? Never saying I'm going to spend time here working on this, It's a lack of commitment. Lastly, individualism. So that takes lots of forms, really. The main one, I think, is just wanting to sort our own life out, basically. It's not exactly our fault, because you could say that the society we're in really bolsters this with all of the, discourse around things like home ownership. Dharnata mentioned car adverts. You're supposed to look good, earn a lot of money, get a great partner, have a big house, and that's going to get you into a lot of rivalry and a lot of commitment to something that may not fulfill you in the end. But the danger of all three of those, rivalry, lack of commitment, and individualism, I think, is that we won't learn. Padmasana perhaps especially the lack of commitment one. Around the time I was being ordained, my dad was talking to me a bit about marriage. I don't think he was making a parallel, but I did. In my mind, he said that the good thing about getting married was, once you've done it, you don't think, when difficulties come up, shall I or shan't I do this? You decided that ages ago. You now apply yourself to, how will I get through this difficulty? Okay? Not what I've done with my life. I joined the order instead. Later remembered this conversation and found it a powerful parallel and reminder. So the very little commitment I've managed, there's a long way to go, although you could say that materially the main commitment of my life I've made, which is a wonderful thing to be able to say I feel very, very fortunate, has meant that I don't go back and question it. When things are difficult, I just try to apply myself to the difficulty. It doesn't mean it's not then a difficulty. It just means I don't start weighing up, giving up and keeping going. I've never really done that. When I came back from my ordination retreat, and like I say, I think this is my good fortune rather than my achievement. Somebody else who was in the order, we were in a long car journey coming here actually, said, "Oh, Prajnamanas, how's it been going since your ordination?" I said, I hadn't really thought about it. I said, well, do you know, the nice thing is I've stopped thinking about my life. And I realised it in the moment, and then I said, and that is really nice. And I realised what it meant was a sort of buzz in my mind about what to do with my life and where this was going actually stopped. To be clear, I don't know where my life is going. Because, you know, I aspire for my joining the order to mean a real opening out of creativity and possibilities. But a kind of anxious, neurotic questioning about who am I and what's it going to be and which way shall I go, and when I get to a fork in the road, which one shall I choose, just really quietened down. And it was such a good thing. So I hugely recommend that, if you sort of mean committing to something, at least. Maybe for some of you it will be joining the order one day. Maybe for many of you it won't. But I think it's important to take up something and decide to commit to it. Because I think that's how we learn. Yeah, I've learned so much more about myself. I'll come back to that. By committing and going through that toughness of saying, this is what I want to do. Let the other options die now. I'm going to pursue this one. Yeah. Okay, so those are three demons: rivalry, lack of commitment, individualism. All of which with the danger that we won't learn. But I think one of the worst demons is the belief that there aren't demons. Buddhism can actually make this worse. It's got a sometimes terrible reputation these days for niceness. The word compassion gets used where it sounds to me like you could just substitute in the word niceness. I think we know very little about what compassion actually means. I think it's well, I don't know, I don't want to venture to say that now. What is it? It's a deep, quiet, mysterious, maybe sometimes even otherworldly quality. It's probably quite an uncommon quality in its elevated forms. Of course, in its day-to-day forms, empathy and concern and so on, you do find it, you do come across it. But Buddhism is niceness we must watch out for. I'm thinking of things like this contemporary fashion for not wanting to judge. Now, I get what that's about, if you see what I mean, and I think there is a proper application of that phrase. But sometimes you hear somebody say, simply as a prelude to criticising somebody else, I don't want to be judgmental, but. Clearly that is exactly what they want to be. They're about to be it, and you're about to hear it. It's an almost sort of mantra-like obligatory repetition now before you say something critical, as though criticism is something we're not allowed to do. That is very dangerous, I think. I noticed that the word criticism, actually, in critical, has become a negative value. I know there are different shades of the word, and you might say, oh, I felt criticised by that, or so-and-so was only critical and didn't encourage or whatever, and that's all fair enough. But Well, I studied literature, and literary criticism is not about, cutting to bits a work of art. It's about deepening your appreciation of it. It's about somebody who has studied it more deeply than us, going into it more deeply, and offering up in a communicable form the benefits of that. Anyway, that's an aside about the fact that probably all of us are critical. I would challenge somebody to come off 5 or 10 days of retreat here and say that they hadn't had a criticism of something that had gone on or something that someone had done. Personally, I think that's okay. We're intelligent beings. We have thoughts. We have a way in which we think things should work. We're not like others. We've all got a unique perspective, if you like. Criticism is really important. Maybe sometimes you have to call it constructive criticism, so that's okay. Constructive criticism is a really important part of friendship. I don't think you can be a real friend to somebody without saying, sometimes, look, you do get into this quite often. How should we get it to happen a bit less? If somebody's in a blaming state, there's a temptation for some reason, like I say, even in some quarters of Buddhism, just to kind of try to make them feel better somehow about themselves. Actually, if somebody's in pain, of course they need supportiveness. So I'm really not ruling that out of the picture, please don't get me wrong. They may also need, at the right moment, somebody to, get a cigarette paper between the kind of valid perception and the kind of instinct to put the responsibility outside of themselves. And, say, I went into this earlier in the retreat, I would be happy if, so-and-so didn't breathe so hard in the shrine room, or, they, I don't know, had different water here. And, more serious examples. People's bosses seem to come in for it a lot. Yeah. Anyway, just as Padmasana said, I've been working at the LBC for 8 years now, and if I had to leave that environment and work somewhere else, of course I would. But I'm very glad to have got out of the world of bosses. It seems a terrible sort of shame that it's the thing that you kind of don't like them, and I know some people do, but sometimes somebody's day obviously would have been, some immaculate 5-star performance if only it weren't for their boss coming along. It's a bit of a shame somehow. And I'm so glad that in the Sangha, people are friends to each other in a way that, perhaps even a bit teasingly, a bit good-humouredly, certainly in a warm, friendly way, doesn't quite let you off the hook with just that, finds that a bit incomplete, wants you to bring into your picture of yourself the fact that actually it's not just your boss that's negative. At that moment, we ourselves might be being a bit negative. What can happen, I think, is that our ordinary egotism, we're cushioned from it. We're so used to getting what we want. I don't know most of you, of course, but, we've all been able to get a train or a car here, go on retreat. That's excellent, by the way. But, we like our hot drinks a certain way, and, I like my memory foam pillow, and I forgot it this time, or it didn't fit in my luggage or whatever. We're so used to getting what we want that it seems it only takes the smartphone breaking to actually bring us up against ourselves, at which point sometimes the temptation is just to say, oh yeah, Windows, they aren't as good as Apple. You see what I mean? Rather than, gosh, I'm really invested and have quite a lot of craving and quite a lot of dependence. I know everything's in the smartphone these days and you can't do without it, and it is a bit of a nightmare if it breaks. I've got rather a nice phone, I'll be upset if I drop it. But you know what I mean, hopefully. It only takes the car breaking down to throw your day out and for your mood to change. And maybe even to start having thoughts of, gosh, this is all so difficult. Because we're so used to getting what we want. And I don't know if... I am talking about me as well. I'm just trying to clarify this. I'm not kind of making any distinction here. I'm part of it. But yeah, again, more serious examples. I know an order member who went on solitary retreat for, 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, and came back, and I think this is very moving, this was a confession, said, I've realised there is still enough anger in me to kill someone. He didn't mean he's going to. Yeah, clearly. It's, I'm sure he never will. But he looked into his mind and admitted something. Our founder said, every human being has it in them to kill someone. And what that really means is if you're pushed far enough, you only have to imagine a little bit, or watch the right films, to know that is possible. We don't know how we'd act. We don't really know. Because this ordinary egotism is so often under wraps. Okay. So, something about a demon in my own life now. No. Before we come to that, how does Padmasana tame a demon? Back to Padmasana briefly. So, he does this by confronting them, getting the demon to tell him its true name, and giving them a treasure to guard. Okay? So there's several steps. He even pins them down, some of them, with his purba, which is a thing like a big pin, or sort of dagger-like pin thing. So he pins them down, gets them to tell him their true name, and gives them a treasure to guard. Because you could say that you can't actually kill them. So it's very noticeable that in the story he doesn't kill them. It's not Michael slaying the dragon. Completely different tradition. And it's a tradition that understands that you're not to slay the dragon, if you see what I mean. You've actually got to get in communication with the dragon. So that's the first thing Padmasana does, is he gets in communication with them. The true name, presumably that means their true nature. The demons' names are things like the one born of slate. I think they're all from mountains of different kinds. Presumably that means discovering the true nature of that demon. Like when the smartphone breaks, thinking individualism. I'm obsessed with my day and how that goes. I'm actually slightly obsessed with that going the way that I want it to. It is completely not part of my plan that something unexpected happens. I've got to apologise for somebody for not doing something. I get thrown off track. I've got to be a bit more creative. I've got to, think fast, not lose my awareness. But boy, there's some strong clinging there. Anyway, back to my little story. I think a demon in my life was anger. I don't see it as a demon anymore because of the discovery of this, if you see what I mean. Well, no, I suppose they are still demons. Doctrinally inaccurate. It is still a demon, but if you know its true name and you're in communication with it and you've given it a treasure to guard, it will not haunt you anymore or blow ice out of its nostrils at you and not disrupt your life so much. Anyway, what happened is I was on my 4-month ordination retreat and just couldn't keep this under wraps anymore. That's basically the story. There were 16 of us, 4 months, in robes for all your meals and all your shrine activities. Program a bit like this, but more meditation, quite a lot more silence. You do things like serve dinner for 6 weeks. Then you're on washing up for 3 weeks. Seriously. Long periods of silence, a lot of looking at your mind. A cold shrine room. And I was just in this kind of tension that I was managing. And it reminded me so much of the problems I'd had in my life and the problems I'd had with people, which was to do with keeping a kind of tension in and under wraps. Of course, not under wraps, because it was having effects. Actually, it was visible. To anyone who was a bit perceptive, it was visible. To anyone who was kindly and courageous, it was communicable. My defences broke. That's what the retreat achieved for me, is that it just They just broke under the kind of warm force of, I don't know, Dharma practice. And Maitreya Bandhu over there, who's a very dear friend and who's my private preceptor and who gave me my name, in the private ordination, gave me a black mala, my bead necklace that I've got with me here. Too much was going on in the private ordination to think about this, so I was like, oh, thank you. I'd just been renamed for the rest of my life and initiated into a new meditation practice, and initiated into a new life, actually, as a phrase has it that we sometimes use. Anyway, the next day, I knew that the two other men he'd ordained that night had malas of different colours. Ooh, So I said, why is mine black? And he said, so that you remember to include your darker energies. And God, it was like a teaching. I think you even said we must carry on thinking about what to do with anger in your life or something kind of movingly collaborative sounding. It was so lovely that he used the word we. I was so touched by that. Rather than you need to think about your anger, it was let's think about that a bit more. Before ordination, it looks like that's going to be some culmination, if you see what I mean. Actually, it's an initiation. Sorry about all the Latinate words, but it's not a kind of peak or an end point. It's actually a kind of start of something. My public preceptor, who a week later put the white caser on, said calls it the end of the beginning. He calls ordination the end of the beginning, which I like. So at the end of the beginning, Maitreya Bandhu said, let's make sure you keep including your darker energies. And so for a lot of the rest of the retreat, because your imagination is quite alive in those circumstances, boy, it was, this mala was a little bit magical. It was like I'd been given a teaching in physical form. And you could say that the demon actually took physical form at that point, if you see what I mean. So something that needed to come out and needed to be out and in the picture, in the conscious picture, was handed to me in a concrete form, saying, here you go, use this, if you see what I mean. Don't be frightened of it. Don't hate yourself for it. Don't try and hide it from yourself. With anger, restraint can be important, but don't try and hide it from other people to the extent of repressing it. So there it is in your hands. So, it had been given a treasure to guard, basically. I've still got the mala. Okay. Padmasana, to swivel back to him. In this form that we've been studying a little bit, with his 1 foot out into the world, trident, skull cup, and so on, I'll just add one other detail about him. He's 32. Okay? Not arbitrary. There's a lot of divisibles of 8 in the multiples of 8 in the Buddhist tradition, but I don't think it's to do with that. Most bodhisattva forms are 16, which in the ancient Indian tradition is the age of the prime of beauty. So most of the figures you'd see about 16. Padmasambhava's double that age. Okay, I suppose that's kind of early adulthood, isn't it? It's not quite middle age. It's not the first throes of adulthood. I happened to turn 32 just a week after my ordination. So what that reminds me of is the fact that an adult knows what they're up against, I think. And that is why the enigmatic smile is also a frown. So I think what he's doing there is saying, I do know you, if you see what I mean. I do know what goes on. I'm wise to it, you haven't fooled me. It's also a smile because he also does love us, if you see what I mean. He loves you. That he's looking at you with a smile because, it's a smile and a frown for the love and courage that I mentioned last night. We could visualise coming into ourselves in the puja. He can see the demons and he can see beyond them to the seeds of enlightenment that every human being contains. So he can see your complete potential, and he is absolutely not fooled about what gets in the way and what else is involved and what else is in the picture. Okay. He wants you to see all of that. He can see it already, so he's completely serene, actually. He's not worried by anything. He is frowning a bit quizzically, because he's saying, I do know you. But he's smiling and coming towards you because he really wants you to see it as well. He's not just some clever guy that we should be impressed by. He's actually trying to merge your awareness with his so that it is the same awareness. So in seeing all of you and in challenging and encouraging you, he's asking more of you. That's basically what he's doing, and that's basically the function in which he's a good friend. I mentioned a good friend earlier, that they've got both sides, support and challenge. Padmasana is being a true friend because he's simply asking much, much more of you, much more of us than we're currently managing. And he knows that there's way more in us than we're even aware of yet. Way, way more. Heights and depths. Sangharakshita, our founder, said, who's involved in so much communication with order members and people in the movement, and really gave his life to communicating the Dharma, which will have involved him in a lot of difficult situations. He'll have drawn, a lot of energies from people for better and worse, for the sake of his comfort. Anyway, he once said, I'm a lot better than people think I am, and a good deal worse. And there, I think, you've just got someone who knows himself. You're not got someone making some unusual admission or showing off. You've just got someone saying, I think it's probably true of everybody, right? It's just a human thing. Much better than people think I am, and also a good deal worse. You're saying, don't forget the second bit. Because we like the first bit, don't we? We all feel like I'm someone, I haven't been understood completely yet. And so-and-so hasn't quite seen me, or whatever. But we're also a good deal worse, in some ways. Just a last little bit about Padmasambhava's arising in the world before I finish. He's sometimes called the second Buddha. In the Tibetan tradition that has Padmasambhava pretty much at the centre of their practice, he's known as the second Buddha. And Sangharakshita once asked a group of students, why do you need a second Buddha? If in this world system, as the tradition has it, you've got Shakyamuni here, who's already arisen, broken through to enlightenment without the help of another enlightened being to show him the way, showing that way to others who've also become enlightened, why on earth later do you need another one? If you see what I mean. After that, surely you've just got enlightened disciples. Okay? They fumbled around for a while trying to find an answer. He eventually gives it to them, which is that in the sweep of history, as in the individual, the arising of the Dharma, so hearing about, impermanence, the importance of metta, compassion, and so on, we're rationally attracted, take up the practice, find it good, feel affected by doing mindfulness of breathing, metta bhavana, come off retreat, actually probably a slightly better person. I don't think it's any less than that. And that arising in our life will stir up and even provoke energies that are not aligned with that project. Okay, so it's not just that there's parts of us that are, as we sometimes say, unintegrated, that we don't know about yet, if you see what I mean. By trying to sort of deepen and grow our better self, we actually provoke the darker energies. They wake up and feel threatened and come to get us a bit harder. So in the individual that's true, but he also thought in the sweep of history that's true. You have Shakyamuni the Buddha, 13 centuries later. You need Padmasambhava because in the world, as in this Tibet where Trisong Detsen wants to establish the Dharma, he's got this terrible fight on his hands. The monastery keeps being pulled down. So Sangharakshita says that through the establishment of Buddhism and the Dharma teaching, all sorts of deeper forces and energies are churned up and come into opposition It's as though the initial promulgation of a teaching, in the course of its very success, churns up very basic energies in society and in human beings, which later on have to be brought under the control of some more radical presentation of the teaching. And that is what Padmasana represents. So we personally will need continually a more radical presentation of the teaching, because the first one serves us for a while. I came on my first winter retreat 10 years ago. I'm still dealing with demons in my mind. Of course I am. Of course I am. And in my life. And sometimes I can't tell if they're inside me or outside me. I might find a situation ongoingly very difficult and know that it's made of some interweaving of my mind and the circumstances. And that means I need to deepen my understanding of what the Buddha is via a teacher like Padmasana. So he calls Buddhism a catalyst, which is something that, well, as you may remember from school, speeds up a reaction without being itself affected, which I thought was quite nice. So it says you stir Buddhism into the world system, it's like a catalyst. It speeds up the reactions, even though itself it stays the same. And that's what happens in your own life. Probably you'll find that coming on retreat and meditating more, it's going to speed up the chemical reaction. In a way, going deeper means you need the teachings more, not less. They don't become lighter and less needed in our life. We need the Dharma in mind more and more as we go deeper. And in its simplest form, I think that's what Padmasana is really saying, is you have a mind, which is the most valuable thing in the universe, so make the best use of it that you can. And one of the really important steps, and the step of taming the demons, going around the whole of Tibet and taming the demons before going to the monastery to help build it, is a deep but very doable job of getting to know what is the terrain, getting the demons to tell us their name, find out their true nature, pin it down, so it doesn't run around and take on all sorts of different manifestations, so that a difficulty in our life doesn't keep being represented in a continually heavy way that blocks us from different angles every time we look at it. If we pin it down, get its true name, and, crucially, give it a treasure to guard, it will actually work in our favour. So if you feel that you have aspects of your personality that don't fit with what's happening, or shouldn't be here, or not part of meditation or whatever, be reassured that they are the other side of the coin of something that can actually work really hard in your service if you get to know its nature and get it to work for you, which is eminently possible, but for which we really, really need the help of a very forthright, inspired, enlightened teacher like Padmasana. Okay, I'll leave it there.